In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
From the outside, Michelle Yang's story might sound like the classic immigrant journey, leaving behind one world to build another. But Phoenix Girl tells a more complicated truth. When Michelle's family left their close-knit Chinese enclave in South Korea and landed in America, the promise of safety and freedom collided with the chaos of a domineering father, a silenced mother, and the endless hustle of survival. By 12, she was manning the counter at her family's Chinese takeout restaurant in Phoenix, learning to navigate not just customers, but cultures, expectations, and her own growing sense of self. In her powerful memoir, Michelle traces that path from fear to freedom, from the instability of her childhood to the steady strength she found in self-acceptance and love. Along the way, she also confronts and redefines her relationship with mental health, openly sharing her journey with bipolar disorder and the deep resilience that comes from embracing one's whole story. Michelle Yang, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Why write the book?
Oh my gosh, it was a calling. I was working in a corporate job. I had gotten my MBA, but my intention was to work in nonprofit. But I was living in Seattle at the time, which is an expensive city. So somehow, without intending to, I got pulled into one of the largest corporations in the world working in Seattle. And it's kind of been go, go, go my whole life at that point. And the competition you feel with even your MBA classmates and everything. And I felt like even though I had this really good job at this corporation that I liked, I wasn't doing enough. And so because it wasn't a job that required an MBA. And so I decided to apply for a promotion and I got it. But on the first day of my promotion, it was announced that my department was being sold to an even larger corporation. And so instead of my welcome meeting, we were going to meet our new corporate overlords. And everybody in the unit was like crying and leaving for the day early. And the next 9 months of my life was pretty hellish. And I found myself crying at my desk pretty regularly. And then by the end there, my mental health was really suffering where I wasn't sleeping for weeks. And I was like, this is life and death. And yet I hadn't disclosed to my work that I live with bipolar disorder. And so they didn't know. Of course, they didn't know that it was life or death. And I needed to make a decision. And I also asked myself, how did I end up here? This is not I wanted to do. I wanted to work in nonprofit. How did I end up here? Why am I here? And I realized that part of it was still I was trying to please my father after all this time. And I was 36 at the time. And so it was a very rude awakening. And I'm like, now I don't have to please my father. I know that. So now I realize this. So what do I want to do? What is my life calling? And I realized that I want to share my story because I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 20. And at that time I was terrified. I didn't know if my future would be ruined. I'd been this good student all this time and had this bright future ahead, but I didn't know if having bipolar 1 and having experienced psychosis and being on medication and all this would mean that I couldn't finish college, that I would never get a successful career. Nobody would want to marry me and my life would be over because that was what I heard from my parents, to be frank. And I was 36, miserable and crying at my desk, but I was like, you know what? But I did all those things. I got a master's. I got married. I'm happily married. I have a beautiful kid. I have this job that I'm doing well at that 500 people would apply for the second I quit it. It's just, I don't want it anymore. And so I don't want this job. And so I was like, so what would give my life meaning? And I wanted to tell my 20-year-old self that it would be okay. Because when I was 20, I was so scared and lonely. And I went to the library because that was my sanctuary. to find an answer. I wanted to find someone, anyone who could show me that they live with bipolar too. And also bipolar also, and that it's okay, that they lived a normal, healthy life. And at that time, I couldn't really find someone that I could relate to that was like an accessible reading. And Toni Morrison said, this is a quote that a lot of writers get inspired by, but it inspired me nonetheless, that if there's a book you want to read that hasn't been written yet, so you must write it yourself. So yeah, at age like 36 with no professional writing experience, I was like, I'm going to try to do this. And that's how it started.
Take us back to the original move from Korea to the United States. What precipitated that decision?
That wasn't my decision, of course, because it's my father's decision. So my parents actually applied for immigration when my mother was pregnant with me, and the paperwork came through when I was 9. So I think people have this perception that's, oh, you just apply and then you can just come over right away. And the only reason that's actually pretty fast. For 10 years is fast, is considered fast. And the reason was, and this was 1990 was when our paperwork was approved, was that my aunt was already in the States. We had some family members already in the States who had been here since the 70s. And so they did a relative petition, which was a type of immigration that was like made it easier for us to come. And we were able to demonstrate that we had a steady income and that we would have jobs waiting for us meeting my parents when we immigrated to the States and everything. And yeah, that's the kind of the technicality of the immigration. And as far as why, so I'm ethnic Chinese born in Korea. As you mentioned earlier, grew up in the Chinatown of Incheon, South Korea. And Korea is an amazing city. I love Korea. I'm culturally Korean. I'm ethnic Chinese and culturally both Chinese and Korean. But I don't think anyone can doubt me when I say that Korean government was not very friendly to the Chinese and still not very friendly to Chinese people living in Korea. And also there's no birthright citizenship. And so even though I was third generation born in Korea, my grandparents' generation came from China to Korea. My parents were born in Korea. I was born in Korea. But I don't have a right to vote. I don't have a right to buy property. And because now it's a much better place, much more democratic nation. Back in the 80s, there was quite a bit of government corruption. There was a lot of bribes that had to be made by business people. It was just not easy at all for Chinese people to live in Korea. And a lot of Chinese people, there's even a New York Times article about the mass exodus of these like people who had been there for generations of the Chinese, that there's no Chinese people left in Chinatown anymore. And yeah, so that's the reason, along with family issues. My dad did not get along with his family, and he's the youngest son out of 7. So it's like, what is he going to inherit sort of a thing? And so he wanted to start fresh.
We're talking with Michelle Yang. Her book is Phoenix Girl, and her website is michelleyangwriter.com. What gave you the courage to seek treatment for this thing that was going on inside of your head?
I struggled throughout high school, even earlier, but help was not accessible to me for many reasons. One, my parents regarded it with a lot of shame and stigma and denial. And so they didn't want to take me to seek help, even when I begged them. And in schools, even the teachers and guidance counselors who really loved me and supported me and had my best interest in mind. Unfortunately, this was the 90s, again, 90s in Arizona. And so they also had model minority myth, I think, was part of the issue. So they thought that I'm okay, even if I'm struggling, because I'm getting good grades and I'm involved in all these activities. It's just like a temporarily I'm stressed out thing. And they didn't take my struggles very seriously. So when I did finally get real help was when I was in China studying abroad while in college, and 9/11 happened while I was there shortly after I arrived. And of course, that was a kind of a very traumatizing experience for all Americans. And it was this very surreal experience to watch the news and watch the planes crashing while I'm a world away. And so I fell into a deep depression while I was in China, and then had a severe episode, probably the most severe episode to date at that point. And I was living with a roommate at the time, so there was no one to cover up my symptoms, right? It's all very visible. I'm in this study abroad program, and there's no model minority myth to cover up my symptoms. There's no reputation that I was this prestigious student to cover up my symptoms, that like, oh, she should be okay no matter what. And the program director and had arranged for my family and everybody to take me to a psychiatrist. And that's how my symptoms were first seen, while they were active and serious.
And how did that make you feel when you finally knew what was going on?
While I was in China, I was still not of my sound mind. And when I came back to Phoenix, I started seeing a psychiatrist regularly. And I was on medication that had all sorts of side effects at first. It was like you were in a car crash. It was like you're in a complete daze. My medication I was on had me sleeping so much at first. And I had to switch medications, and it was much better after that. I know a lot of people who are well managed with medication are terrified, like me, of like making any medication changes for that reason. But yeah, no, it was like a very shocking experience. And my psychiatrist at first wanted to diagnose me with major depressive disorder, because bipolar is such a serious diagnosis. So he put me on antidepressants first, which made me have a manic episode, which that was how it led to my first hospitalization, which is a very shocking experience as well. But in the hospital, I was given the right medication that made me feel back to more myself. It's not quick. I think most people don't realize that it is like having surgery, that when you come out, you need a recovery period. It's not, okay, I'm out now, I'm back to normal. But yeah, it was a shocking experience. It was a terrifying experience. Like I mentioned earlier, it was a lonely experience. Yeah, it was probably the hardest moment of my life.
Was there a turning point for you when you really started to feel like you had a better understanding of your situation and you were getting better?
Yeah, I think what it was, so I write about this moment in my memoir, but I was terrified about going back to college because I had this very prestigious scholarship so they select the top 20 students out of the state of Arizona, and your entire education is paid for, and they fund your study abroad and travel. And so I worked so hard for this scholarship, and I was worried that I would lose the scholarship. I was worried that how people would look at me if they knew everything I had been through. And this was like my junior year. And I didn't know how I would go on. I just wasn't ready. And my psychiatrist at the time told me, Michelle, you can take a break. You can take a semester off. And that was just like mind-blowing moment for me because, again, I had been go since I was a kid, like straight A's, doing everything, working at the restaurant that my family owned. Never had a moment to stop and reflect and pause. And I didn't know that was a possibility, to take a break and to give myself time to heal and recover. And I did that. And yeah, my scholarship was supportive, and it was. And then when I did eventually go back to school, I realized that everyone is so self-absorbed that they don't know that I was gone. They didn't realize I was gone. They don't really care. And so I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. Everything is okay. No one's going to really know. And I love to tell people that, especially when I do these speaking engagements with young people, that it's like, you think everyone is looking at you, but no, everybody's looking at themselves.
How do you write the balance between vulnerability and empowerment when talking about mental health?
For me, it was very intentional when I wrote this memoir, because I did not want to drag my readers down with me in my dark moments. I've read a lot of memoirs now by this point. Thankfully, there are every year more memoirs, more stories are published from people who live with mental health conditions. So I know of many more books than in late 2018 when I first went on this journey. And I'm grateful for every one of those stories. But I certainly did not set out to write trauma porn. I wanted it to be an inspiring story. I wanted my book to be one example of light at the end of the tunnel. And that's why I very much insisted on the subtitle of my memoir, which is How a Fat Asian with Bipolar Found Love. Because right on the cover, there's a happy ending. And the found love part is so important to me. And when I was writing my memoir, I wrote 12 versions of it. At least I kept rewriting, improving it. And I would categorize, I highlighted each chapter as, is this a optimistic chapter? Is this the dark chapter? Optimistic, dark, or dark. And I wanted to make sure it never stayed in the dark for too long, that I would have like a relief chapter, so that I wanted to keep my readers with me, keep my readers buoyant, and I wanted to try to be as gentle with them as possible. And I know it's still a hard book to read with a lot of hard, difficult content and themes, but I hope that I achieve that with trying to be that thoughtful. And so I think that is the balance of showing everything that is vulnerable, that I think is meaningful and healing, but also empowering and optimistic at the same time.
We're talking about Phoenix Girl with Michelle Yang. Her website is michelleyangwriter.com. How does self-love show up in your life today compared to when you first began this journey?
My goodness. I think it shows up. Yeah. So the found love, the ultimate love is self-love. And it is, we're all still on that journey. I think a lot of us, I don't know who isn't. I certainly am. I think that I thought I had found a lot of the self-love part by the time I was writing this book, but I think I've achieved certainly another level of it since the book has been out. Because all the processing that I did while writing, like I'm a genuine believer in that you got to process your trauma and everything in therapy. That's not what your book is for. Make sure you're processed, everything. And the book is, for me, like a piece of art, a piece of storytelling that I want the reader to get some value from. And so that's how I approached my book. But even I get asked this all the time, was the book healing for you? And I think it is, because you are giving testimony, and then all these people now are reading it and telling me back, I relate. This is what your book meant to me. And I've never read another book like this. For example, there's no other book that I know of that is telling a story from a ethnic Chinese born in Korea point of view. And now we are a community. Now we are a unique tribe of sorts. And I think the older we get, I hope that everyone love themselves more. So I'm now 44. So I think you just have to fight to love yourself every day, that you're telling your story, that I have the right to tell the story. And I fought really hard to get here. And I think, my book is a proof of that, because you have to fight hard to get any book published. And all of that has meant a higher level of love for myself. So that's like a funny thing to talk about.
Did looking back over the traumatic events in your past life from the perspective of someone who's had therapy and has an understanding about your current situation, did that make it any easier to process what's happened to you?
It was so hard, right? That was there in therapy. The first time you go through it live in therapy is when you're looking at your childhood through your adult lens. And that was heartbreaking for me, because I didn't know that wasn't okay, because how I grew up was how I grew up. So that's all I knew. And I always was very close with my parents. So I was always like, they did the best they could. I never doubted anything that they did until I was an adult, until I was about to have a child of my own. And I didn't want to fail my child. And it was a terrifying time where I was like, how do I prepare? How do I do everything I can to make sure I provide my child a nurturing family and nurturing home? And I began intensive therapy then, even though I had been doing therapy before, but it was like I kicked it up another level. And that's when I realized how traumatic my childhood had been. Because at first I wasn't even ready to call my childhood, name it trauma. My therapist had to guide me there. But yeah, so I had processes at all and then had several years to sit with it before I started writing the book. And then as far as your question of like, how does it feel to look back on it with a person with therapy, who's had therapy, I think it was just, even though I had processed it in therapy, it was still hard to write those scenes in the book. I would physically get ill and I would be in bed for 4 or 5 days after forcing myself to write a scene because I was like, I can't put this off anymore. I need to write this chapter. Yeah, no, it's just hard. There's no way around it.
You've become a strong advocate for Asian American mental health awareness. What changes have you seen and what still needs to happen?
One thing that I love is so many Asian American mental health books are out there now. So many more advocates are speaking out. One of my favorites is Stephanie Fu's What My Bones Know about complex PTSD. Incredible book. And she was a This American Life producer. So like meticulously researched and a wonderful storyteller. So highly recommend her book. There are just so many books now. The Magical Language of Others by E.J. Cole is another one that is so beautifully written and so insightful. And my mentor, Grace Talusin, wrote The Body Papers, which is also amazing, won the Massachusetts Book of the Year, that covers so many different in-depth issues. So I'm so glad that there are so many of these books are out there now that if I could find when I was 20 and newly diagnosed, it would have, I think, made my journey a lot easier. And so I hope that people who are newly diagnosed or struggling with their mental health are finding these books. And I think that they are. And then as far as the other side of your question of what more can be done, and that is still stigma. There's still so much stigma that needs to be fought against medication, against the people just still there's so much shame around talking about mental health. I know that we say 1 in 4 people living worldwide live with a mental health condition. And that's great. I think that's great because it puts things in perspective that look how prevalent this is, that we shouldn't judge so much because we all live with a mental health condition or we love someone with a mental health condition. But at the same time, I realized during my advocacy journey, I really thought about this statistic because it's used so much. It's like, we would never say 1 in 4 people live with a physical health condition because that would be meaningless. Like physical health, like what everybody has physical health. And I know why that statistic is used, and I definitely see value in that, but I also would love for us to move towards less us than them. Those people who are mentally ill and those people who aren't. Because we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And so I think that is the only way maybe that we can move past the judgment and stigma and more towards just understanding and loving. The other way I explain this is like catch-22 of living with a bipolar disorder or some serious mental health like this is that if you are doing well, like if you are thriving and you are in a good career and happy family and stuff, that you never tell anybody that you live with bipolar disorder. So you like keep it a secret. Like me, I kept it a secret for 2 decades. And there's a lot of internalized stigma where you're like, I'm not one of those people, because the only people we see in the media who live with severe mental health conditions are those in crisis who can't hide. And so then, so it's a catch-22, because if the only people visible in society with mental health struggles are those who are actively in crisis, then how are those people who are newly diagnosed ever going to see the light at the end of the tunnel? Are ever going to know that, no, there actually are a ton of people who are living well and taking care and living a full life. So yeah, it's the catch-22 of stigma.
What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with Phoenix Girl?
Humanizing mental health. The book also is about other themes too, how a fat Asian with bipolar found love, about body image, body shaming that so many of us have grown up with and still are living with. And I want everybody to come out of this book and love themselves more from like reading, seeing themselves in my stories. I hope that they don't, because then they would be, I don't know, there's happy stuff too. So like in the happiness and in the heavy things, but coming out of it saying, yeah, no, we were in similar situations and we both made it out.
If you could go back and talk to that 12-year-old behind the restaurant counter, what would you tell her?
You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Not everything that is happening now is going to be always what you have to live under forever. I think, yeah, anyone who has imperfect childhoods, one day you can break out of the cycle. I consider myself a intergenerational trauma breaker. I broke many types of different cycles. And yeah, I want to give her a hug and be like, you're going to be okay. It is hard. It feels hard because what you're going through is a lot, but you'll be okay one day. And I'm proud of you and I love you.
Your family was in the restaurant business. Let's talk about food.
Because the Chinese people born in Korea brought this unique Chinese cuisine to Korea that became Koreanized. That is like one of the most popular. It's pizza level, like how pizza is in the US, because the Chinese people are very entrepreneurial and was making deliveries. I don't know if you've heard of these foods, but it's these black bean noodles, and jjampong is the spicy noodle soup. Tangsuyuk is this kind of sweet and sour pork, but it's a Korean Chinese style. It's like a clear sauce instead of red, like here in the States. And it is home to me because both of my families on my mom's side and my dad's side owned restaurants that sold this kind of food. So it's my family's livelihood. It's how I'm here today, is because of this food that my families on both sides made with love and sold and built their dreams upon.
So what do you feed your family?
I don't know how to cook that food. So I need to learn, but it takes a lot of steps. And so I don't know how to do that, but I do cook a lot of Chinese food and Korean food. And my son loves it. He's 12 and he loves all like Korean and Chinese food that I feed him. And in fact, now he is quite a chef himself, and he makes mapo tofu, which is like the ultimate comfort food for us, because now we live in a cold place and we're like, is there anything more comforting than spicy tofu? We haven't found it. We have mapo tofu pretty regularly. We have kimchi soup. My son loves instant ramen because those are so popular. I try to limit his intake because he would eat it every day if he could. So maybe that will come for him when he's in college, and I can't make sure he only eats a limited amount.
The book is Phoenix Girl, written by our special guest, Michelle Yang. You can learn more about her and get access to the book at michelleyangwriter.com. Michelle, this has been wonderful. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Terry. This is, again, such an honor and pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.